Well, it felt like a science project back when I was in 5th or 6th grade, this little project we did this week for the forum. Fortunately, I had some help and other ideas and resources. I suppose it's appropriate that, like most of the science projects, somebody else in the family did most of the work. I don't know if that ever happened for you. But you can see the fruits of our labor sort of sitting there. And of course, the whole purpose of this is so that we can get a better feel of what it might look like in our sanctuary if we had screens and a projector system. It is, of course, a way to give people information for worship, and we have other ways to do that, and we'll continue using other ways even if we would proceed with this project. We are always relieved to know that the future of the kingdom is not in our hands and in our efforts. And, whatever we decide to do about this, God will find a way to use this church in fruitful ways. It's easy, though, to get caught up in things that don't matter. It's easy to get weighed down by stuff that isn't really a matter of life and death, but somehow it takes on this enormous importance and creates an anxious heart that makes it hard to be a witness. I had moments last week where my anxiety certainly triumphed over the power of the gospel. There's no need to make this a confession. It would make the sermon so long every week. But it was certainly a time when fretting over things like this just was too much. And even people who are so valuable to the life of this place and keep us going and matter so much and show the love of Christ in such real ways, I managed to find ways to hurt and alienate them. It's extraordinary, sort of how we can lose sight of where we're headed. And certainly that's part of what we encounter in this wonderful passage from the book of Isaiah. And we should start to know where Isaiah was taking those people. We should start by remembering where they were. And his words are addressed to people in exile. They're people that have been taken from their homeland in Jerusalem and taken off to Babylon, which is way inland, hundreds of miles away from their home country. And I love the way the prophet starts. He goes, "Listen to me, O coastlands," even though there are not coastlands days away from where he is. And yet the word is good enough that it will go from this place where they are in captivity to another place, way far away. Listen to me, Australia. Listen to me, South Africa. The word will go that far. And for a moment, the prophet gets to stop and think about his own background. And it's interesting, the prophet moves back and forth between his own personal call and the call that's given to the nation. And that's probably also how we ought to hear this text. That we are both the one who is addressed by the prophet, and we are also the prophet ourselves. We are God's people, and yet we are the one that need to be called to become the people that God would have us be. And now the Lord says, "Who formed me in the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him, and that Israel might be gathered for him. God has become my strength," says the prophet. But there was a moment in this passage where it was hard for the prophet to get there. He said to me, "You are my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified." But I said, "I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing and vanity." Probably everybody here has felt like that a lot of times. But there was a moment in this passage where it was hard for the prophet to get there. He said to me, "You are my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified." But I said, "I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing and vanity." Probably everybody here has felt like that a lot of times. They've labored for this place in some way. They've labored for God's cause in some way. And yet, they've had their feelings hurt. They've found themselves cast on the outside. Their good ideas haven't been heard. And yet, the place hasn't lived up to the expectations of what it means to be the people of God. And yet, it seems like they have labored in vain. We have labored in vain. It hasn't borne the fruit we thought might happen. And the prophet takes a moment to say, yet surely my cause is with the Lord, and my reward is with my God. So we think about that truth of a broken, fallen church that so often fails to live up to the thing that God would have it be. We think of the truth of ourselves as broken, fallen people who so often fail to be the people God would have us be. We think about that truth, and we know that somehow there is another truth that also stands alongside it. Got a story to share from a pastor back in Connecticut. Erica Wimber of Vina writes, the church was next door to a group home for adults. One day, one of them came in and sat down before worship, uninvited. She was painfully overweight and wearing clothing that didn't fit. She hadn't bathed, wasn't able to breathe or move comfortably. She wouldn't speak or make eye contact with anyone. From the beginning, she tried our patience. More than once, she forgot where she was and lit up a cigarette right there in the pew. Her medication prevented her from being able to follow the order of worship. She fell asleep during sermons. Thank goodness that has never happened to any of you. Her breathing problems escalated and became loud snoring problems. You can imagine the conversations we had at council meetings. She doesn't belong here. She couldn't possibly be getting anything out of it, so heavily medicated. Some tried financial tactics. I'm tithing to this church, and she's just giving pennies. She shouldn't be allowed to ruin it for everyone. Some observed that she ate too many cookies at coffee hour. They worried that she was a deterrent to other visitors. I worried about everyone. Finally, an exasperated council member said that she'd had enough of all this talk. She announced that she would make a friend out of our troubled visitor and would hereafter be sitting next to her in church. Gentle reader, take note, writes the author. This means that after more than 25 years sitting in one pew, she moved to a different pew. When the snoring started, the council member gave her a gentle nudge. She helped our visitor find the right hymn to sing. She reminded her to put her cigarettes away and limited her to no more than 3 cookies in the fellowship hall. That small act was all our visitor needed. Soon I witnessed her talking to people. She made eye contact and learned to shake my hand at the door after worship. Her first words to me were, "Bless you." Some months later, I received a phone call from the woman's social worker. She told me that she had never been accepted by any group or able to sustain a single positive relationship until she started coming to our church. "Thank you for welcoming her," he said to me. "I've never been to your church, but I know that it's an exceptional place." After I hung up the phone, I sat for a moment. Exceptional? Empowered now, she went on to make friends with the others in her group home and brought them all with her to church. She gained her whole life back, put her demons behind her, and told anyone who would listen what the Lord had done for her. Who is powerless and who is powerful? Hasn't God chosen the powerless in the world to be powerful in faith? The people Isaiah was preaching to were people far from home, imprisoned by a foreign government, and finally given a reprieve that they could go back to their old life. But Isaiah said, it's not enough just for you to make the trek from Babylon back home. You have to remember that the God who is overseeing all this is a God who is calling you to be a light to the nations, to hold up God's cause in this place so that everyone will now stream to their Lord. It is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the survivors of Israel. I will give you as a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. A lot of times, I think we feel like our purpose is to be a nice little church. But that's not the purpose ever. The purpose is always to hold up our cause that is God's cause, that says there is one whose love is so pervasive that it can change the world. Maybe a life at a time, maybe a whole bunch of lives. But it starts with that word of life and love that says, I have called you and you are mine. And that's a word we get to share with everybody we meet and know, even when we recognize how flawed the vessel is. The gospel lesson talks about those people who come to Jesus. And the whole Gospel of John is a story about people misunderstanding what it is that Jesus understands until finally they more deeply step into the life that God would have for them. It's a slow process, and boy, the disciples seem so dumb sometimes. But in the end, they sort of get it. I think it's a great picture for the church. It's a slow process, and sometimes we're such a dim bulb that finally we are the light of the world. Tomorrow, there is a celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day here at this church. Things start at 5:30. It'll be followed by a reception. I hope all of you can make it. I remember when we studied the 50th anniversary of the letter from a Birmingham jail. Dr. King's greatest indictment was not those who were blatant enemies of his efforts to overturn racism and segregation, but it was the silent sympathizers who failed to stop injustice when they saw it. It was such an indictment, I think, of all those well-intentioned people who don't succeed in bringing about change. We should remember that we have been empowered to be change on God's behalf. And we should seize that occasion and be that light.